Michael Cohen wrapping up his third day of Capitol Hill testimony, meeting with House Russia investigators. This one, unlike yesterday, behind closed doors. It ran over 7.5 hours, and there are promises about being back next week.
There's not much I can say other than it was very productive. As I said, I'm committed to telling the truth, and I will be back on March 6th to finish up. There's more to discuss.
There you have it, an announcement late today. That is a piece of news. The aftershocks from Cohen's earthquake testimony have continued to reverberate across the day. There are investigators who say this means what Cohen said under oath, and if the Republicans fact-checking him want to really get to the bottom of it, well, this means we're going to have to hear, as a nation, as a Congress, from a lot more people who are close to Trump. The Oversight Committee now saying they want to discuss all of this with Donald Trump's longtime tax lawyer, Sherry Dillon. You remember her at the first press conference in the transition, all about how Trump reimbursed Cohen for the hush money payments. Meanwhile, Chairman Cummings says, get ready for a lot more witnesses.
We'll go through, we'll figure out who we want to talk to, and we'll bring them in.
People in the Trump family, Ivanka Trump, Donald Trump Jr.
Just follow the transcript.
Just follow the transcript. This is what subpoena power looks like. This is what it looks like when a Mueller witness like Michael Cohen, who spent so much time with Donald Trump, goes under oath. In some ways, the investigative leads that they're following on today are even bigger than what was laid out yesterday. Now, as for the statement by this powerful chairman, follow the transcript, well, we did.
Don Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump. It would either be Eric Trump, Rona Graff is Mr. Trump's executive assistant, David Pecker, Dylan Howard, Barry Levine of AMI as well, Alan Weisselberg, Alan Garten of the Trump Organization as well.
Who else knows that the president did this?
Alan Weisselberg, Ron Lieberman, and Matthew Calamari.
Would Don Jr. or Mr. Weisselberg have more information about that?
Mr. Weisselberg, for sure.
For sure. Now, Donald Trump Jr. and Ivanka Trump, name-checked by Cohen. Our cameras caught Don Jr. at a conservative conference today where he was basically trying to dodge any of those questions that many people have about what Cohen said. You can dodge those, cameras, but you can't ignore investigators in the House when they have subpoenas. The House Intel Committee planning to call Alan Weisselberg, Donald Trump's CFO, in to testify. So this is what we are seeing and hearing from Congress today. What we don't know is what else is happening with investigators who have even more tools in the Southern District of New York. Cohen hinting that they have investigations that are basically undisclosed, and he says he's in constant contact with them. Tonight, we will also speak later in the hour exclusively to the former head of that office, which is sure to be interesting. But I begin with former Watergate Special Prosecutor Nick Ackerman, Christina Greer, political science professor at Fordham University, and Elie Mystal, executive editor of Above the Law. Thanks to each of you for being here. Nick, we are seeing the House actually treat Michael Cohen the way Mueller has been treating him, as a fact witness, which doesn't matter whether you like him or not, but you follow every lead.
That's right. And I think what they have to do next, you mentioned all these witnesses in the opening here and all the various people they have to speak to. But I think one of the key things here is putting together the critical documents, Donald Trump's tax returns, the financial statements that Michael Cohen mentioned yesterday, the one that went to Deutsche Bank for a loan, the ethics disclosure form, the tax forms he submitted to local governments to try and get his taxes on his golf courses lowered. There are all of these various financial forms that he has filled out over the years. And if I were doing this, I would take these, put them on a table, and start comparing them. And then when you see that the numbers are different, that when he's lowballing it with the local taxes, what's he saying to the federal tax return, to the government? What's he saying on his ethics disclosure form that he filed? And then you bring in the witnesses and find out who filled these out, whether they looked at these other forms in doing that, and what did Donald Trump say to them as to what should go on each of those forms. That's how I would make a case. He either committed tax evasion, he committed mail fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud, any or all of the above. That's what I would be looking at.
Prosecutors are scary, man. Wow.
I mean, you really lay it out.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even include the WikiLeaks bombshell that I know is near and dear to your heart, Nick Ackerman, because you've been talking about this. Now, viewers of this show have heard me say, maybe Roger Stone was just lying and exaggerating. He is a known liar. And so maybe there's no there. I say that because it's possibly true, and I say it in fairness. Yesterday had hints moving the other direction, which goes more towards the more aggressive Ackerman view. It's widely known as the Ackerman view, this obsession with collusion. But in all seriousness, I want to read from reporting by Jeffrey Toobin in The New Yorker before the Cohen hearing, when he had said earlier this month there were persistent rumors that Mueller has a witness who says he heard Trump and Stone on a speakerphone discussing WikiLeaks. When pressed on this, Stone told Toobin, prove it. Well, take a look at Michael Cohen not only testifying now famously to that yesterday, but walking through the details of how those calls were set up in Mr. Trump's office.
Is there anyone else the committee should talk to about the president's knowledge of the WikiLeaks email dump?
Well, again, when he called, Rona Graff yelled out to Mr. Trump, Roger's on line 1, which was regular practice.
And that's his assistant?
That's his, yes. Her office is directly next to his, and she's involved in a lot that went on.
That would be bad enough. But then one more piece of evidence for the Ackerman file. According to CNN, and NBC has not confirmed this, but CNN did report Trump reportedly told Mueller in writing Roger Stone did not tell him about WikiLeaks. Are we looking at a bombshell in plain sight?
I think we are, but we also have a lot of blanks that haven't been filled in yet, because it all starts on June 3rd when Goldstone writes to Don Jr. about the fact the Russian government is supporting Donald Trump in his campaign, that they've got the dirt, which are the emails on Hillary Clinton, and they offer to bring those to Rona Graff. Who is the secretary, but they didn't want to send it to her, so they're going to bring it in person. And then in the course of those few weeks, nothing shows up. Donald Trump says on June 6th he's going to lay out all the stuff on the Clintons the following week, doesn't do it. A few days later, Guccifer 2.0, the Russian intelligence officer, brings out some of those documents, releases them, and then in a few days later, within a week or so, all of a sudden, these documents show up with Julian Assange at WikiLeaks. So we've got a lot of blanks to fill in, to fill out that whole story. We just don't know the entire story yet.
And that's the WikiLeaks angle. I mean, I think one of the biggest things that happened, I think you give a lot of credit to the Democrats here. I think AOC especially laid this out very well. Alan Weisselberg is coming on down, right? And what we've learned from Cohen is that Alan Weisselberg was in the room where it happened. All of it happened. Every single time that Cohen allegedly said something, the person who can confirm it is Alan Weisselberg. Every time Cohen talked about a financial document or a financial issue, the person who can confirm it is Alan Weisselberg, and Alan Weisselberg is now coming. So I think that's significant. I think the other significant thing, and Nick kind of alluded to this, but people who are not kind of covering kind of financial news and whatever don't really know this, Deutsche Bank is on fire. All right, Deutsche Bank is suspected of having deep money laundering issues, and for a long time, Deutsche Bank.
And if you say it any louder, people in the studio will think there is a fire.
And for a long time,
don't yell fire in an empty newsroom. That's a very famous law school. Go ahead.
And Deutsche Bank has so it's been money laundering for there have been a worry that they're money laundering for a while, and for a long time, Deutsche Bank was the only person willing to lend Trump money. The Republicans tried to muddy this water with their Michael Cohen's making up all these lies and going to prison so he can get a book deal. But Michael Cohen wasn't lying to Deutsche Bank so Michael Cohen could buy the Buffalo Bills. He was lying to Deutsche Bank so Donald Trump could buy the Buffalo Bills. And if you lie to Deutsche Bank, that is a federal crime. And guess who knows that? Last time I was here, we were talking about SCNY, Robert Kuzmani. Guess where Robert Kuzmani works when he's not working for the government? Deutsche Bank. So there is an excellent chance that the people at SDNY have the institutional knowledge to really drill down on this Deutsche Bank fire issue that Cohen not only produced documents for yesterday, but testified to the fact that Trump and his financial disclosures to the bank have been all lies.
Right. Well, I mean, I think someone on Twitter said that, Cohen came with receipts longer than CVS. I mean, I think what's really important is that different AGs from across the country actually now have an invested interest in looking at, going back to Nick's point, looking at all of Trump's various properties, because what was so clearly obvious yesterday is that he devalues himself when it's advantageous and he can have the taxpayers pay for this, and he overvalues himself just based on his name and what his branding is, on how he thinks of himself. And so this has been a decades-long process with Trump, and he's clearly surrounded himself with what some people might argue is a cesspool of degenerates. And Cohen laid it out. Cohen admitted that he was one of those degenerates as well for a very long time, and now he has no use to do that because he actually is worried about the future of American democracy.
Right. So Ackerman, if they follow this out, what is the deal with Weisselberg and the agreement he did or didn't have for some sort of cooperation?
Well, it sounds to me like he got immunity, so they're going to put him back in. I mean, he's going to be, if he hasn't been already, questioned about all of these things. And don't underestimate the secretary. If you want to know what somebody has done, and this happened in Watergate. I could almost go through each defendant. It was the secretary who always gave people up. They know everything.
Well, and didn't we learn in the Watergate it was the secretary with the hand motion that cut out the gap in the tape, right? It was all her fault.
Oh, of course
if you
it was
believe
her
Richard
fault.
Nixon.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
That's my memory of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
As some people say, I take him at his word. We're done here. Now, I want to turn to another thing for you, Christina, which is, if Barack Obama's
We can't play that game.
decade-long serving aide came out and addressed the nation under oath and said that there was this history of racism or this clear animus against white people or countries run by white people or many of the other things that Michael Cohen testified to, which, yes, many people think. But I don't really buy the argument you see some places, you see on the internet, of people saying, well, we already knew this. I actually would put it differently. People thought a lot of things, and Donald Trump said certain things in public. Charlottesville, something we all know.
But gold escalator announcement.
Gold escalator. So yes, there's a lot there, and the policies. But does it not advance the character account and the credible allegations of long-standing, deep-seated racism, as Michael Cohen put it, against the sitting president of the United States? Don't we also need to care about that?
We should, but we see that it hasn't moved the needle. It hasn't moved his base.
Well, today is the next day.
Yeah.
Aren't we here dealing with the needle? Let me give you an example. I was afraid you would say that, and I brought, not a receipt, but I brought an item. The Wall Street Journal editorial board is notoriously highly conservative. And it's owned by Rupert Murdoch. Take it what you will. Here's their piece today about Cohen and the Coliseum from the editorial board. This was a reminder Americans elected a president who'd spent decades in the sleazier corners of New York business and tabloid life, associated with dreadful characters, has no great character himself. They go on to say, when picking a president, character must matter.
Yeah, sure. But, I mean, I think for those of us who have a modicum of common sense, we know that Donald Trump has been below character since, you know, for the last 40 years.
This is what I'm pressing you on. When people come on TV and say, I already knew it, that's good enough.
Yeah.
That's more polarized division. What I'm saying is, does what we heard under oath potentially matter for some new people? Why do we assume that everything's frozen in amber?
I don't think so, Ari, because look at how the Republicans behaved. They were not moved. They doubled down.
What about Americans watching it?
We saw Representative Meadows. Really, I'll get to the Americans in a second. We saw Representative Meadows gaslight Representative Tlaib in a way that every single person of color who has ever cleaned houses or been a dean of a university has seen that scenario play out, where all of a sudden it's about him, he's halfway crying, and she's apologizing for his behavior and his prop of a black woman. The American public, I don't know. I mean, Ari, what is it going to take? If you didn't think that there was a problem when he came down the escalator and said Mexicans are rapists, if you didn't think that there was a problem with the Muslim ban, if you didn't think that the tweet for the trans ban was a problem, if you didn't think that the S-hole countries was a problem, if you didn't think that kneeling football players were SOBs was a problem.
This is what we're debating out, and then I want Ellie to get in, but this is what we're debating. This is what we're debating. When you lay out your moral and ethical critique, I think it makes perfect sense. When you lay out your strategic assumption that no one can be moved in America anymore,
people can be moved.
I don't know that that is right.
People
I certainly don't think it's optimistic.
Moved, Ari, and some days I am optimistic. Some days people definitely can.
And
be
I'm
moved,
not trying to optimism shame
they're
you.
not
I wouldn't do that.
optimism shaming. That's a good one. I think people can be moved, but they have not been moved by this president. If you weren't moved after Heather Hyers was killed in Charlottesville, I don't know what it's going to take.
Briefly,
racists cannot be moved. The point of this cannot be to convince racists to be a little bit less racist just this one time. That cannot be the point. The point has to be to inspire people who haven't made a call yet, to inspire people who are on the fence about racism, to inspire the 100 million people who couldn't get off the couch and vote in 2016. Those are the people that we need to inspire. And the 60 million people that have already cast their hats in with a bigot and a sexist, those people we don't have to talk about anymore.
Elie Mystal, Christina Greer, Nick Ackerman, thanks to each of you for your views. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.